Hi, it's Danny again. This is lecture number 10. This is the lecture on primate sociality, or really, it's the lecture on primate adaptations to social life. We are primates, of course, so this is where we're going to be talking about some of our, at least social commonalities with other members of this order, primates. This picture is from my field site. This is a rhesus macaque, a kind of old world monkey. This is at Jakku Mandir in Shimla in India. The face he's making there is a mild threat. Look at this. He's got his cheek pouches a little bit puffed up. He's been stuffing food in there. Probably he's eyeballing a tourist right now. Now, he's probably looking at another monkey, actually. He wouldn't be making that face at a tourist. Well, to review, let me just get this up. To review, we humans, we are animals. Animals are eukaryotic, multicellular, predatory, or you could say animals are heterotrophs, and animals have the power of motility. Furthermore, we are chordates, which means we have notochords. We are also mammals, which means we have heterodont dentition, we give live birth, we have hair, we are endothermic, we are often social, we have 3 ear bones that allow us to hear higher frequencies than our reptilian ancestors. We have expanded cortexes that allow for greater plasticity with our learning and with our behaviors. We provide care to our juvenile offspring. We communicate through multiple senses at once. We have long lives as juveniles. We take a long time to grow up, and we produce milk. All that together, our expanded cortexes, our increased parental investment, our long growing up, our multimodal communication, all this together adds up to everything that a mammal needs in order to be social. We derive our capacity to play from these traits. We derive our tendency to develop bonds with other individuals from these traits. We have a plastic neural anatomy that allows us to learn different kinds of information, to deal with multiple sources of information, and to adapt to new environments in real time. I guess in that sense, we wouldn't really be adapting, since that is an evolutionary process, but we would be acclimating, perhaps, or using technology to change the environment towards our ends. And also, this mammalian heritage has left us with organs specialized for communication, especially multimodal communication. All this together can be understood as a functional complex. And remember, that's a set of traits that works together to suit an organism to its environment. Also, just recall that sociality is the capacity to organize into groups. And that being social is adaptive because it helps with cooperative child rearing. We can rely on members of the group for memory, and we can solve problems as a group. We can defend one another, and it's easier to find mates if you have lots of friends nearby. Now, today we're going to be talking about primates, so let's go back over the primate traits that I introduced last time. Primates have hands and nails. No claws, they have nails. Primates have stereoscopic vision. We'll talk about that today. Primates offer even more intense examples of sociality. They invest more in their children, and they take even longer to grow up than most other mammals. This year's review, I want you to recall that for about 130 million years, see, I got the number right on this one, for about 130 million years, that's a good 2/3 of the time that mammals have been around. Mammals were just these small, ratty-looking guys. They were nocturnal, they were arboreal, and they ate insects. So, primates. The first primates were plesiadapsids, or plesiadapids, rather. That is, they are related to this genus of possible primate called Plesiadapis. Here it says that he's the earliest known primate, but Plesiadapis may not have been a primate. It may have been a member of whatever came before. At any rate, it's an ancestral organism, or at least it's closely related to the ancestors of primates. And we can understand something about what early primates would have been like by looking at Plesiadapis. I want you to note that they lived somewhere between 55, 58 million years ago, or maybe those would be the earliest ones. What that means is, because dinosaurs died out about 65 million years ago, mammals started to go through adaptive radiation to fill all those niches, all those professions in the environment that were left over by dinosaurs. And so they diversified. And these arboreal Plesiadapis were representative of the radiation that would later lead to primates. So look at Plesiadapis. You can see it has primate features, such as it has hands, grasping hands with a thumb that goes out at an angle. Well, this would be its hind limb. This would be its forelimb. It actually looks quite a lot like a lemur. So right here, this is what I'm talking about. This is another reconstruction of Plesiadapis. That last one looked a lot like a squirrel. This one looks like a lemur. And this reconstruction of Plesiadapis looks kind of like a mongoose, I guess. This one's pretty interesting, though. It's got the hands. It has nails. Not nails, it has claws. But anyway, we can look at this creature, and you can go back and look at the skeleton in the previous slide. It's arboreal. It has limbs that are adapted for climbing and leaping. I'll show you more of that on the next slide with a relative of Plesiadapis. Also, it was folivorous. It ate leaves. Its teeth were shearing blades, not like carnassials in a carnivore, but more like the teeth of something that would be cutting through thick plant matter or grinding up leaves all day. I want you to take note of this because this is a step away from that model of the early mammal, which was insectivorous, which ate insects. Plesiadapis had moved to a folivorous lifestyle. It was now eating leaves. Also, it was probably diurnal. That means it came out during the day instead of being nocturnal. And this is just a good guess because most leaf eaters are diurnal. Leaf eaters tend to rely a lot on sight in order to pick out which leaves are ready to be eaten. And so that's something that's best done during the day. The Plesiadapids and their relatives were specialized leapers. This is a Notharctus. This is a later relative of Plesiadapis. This one also could be an early primate. It's hard to say for sure. I think Notharctus is pretty much agreed upon as a primate, 50 million years old. Darwinius was a primate 47 million years ago. This shadow here. When they discovered Darwinius, there was this huge hype machine behind it. There was a book that came out, there was a documentary, and there was all this jive that was fed to the science media about how Darwinius in some way was the first true hand? I really don't know what they were talking about, and the research in no way seems to indicate that Darwinius was actually some sort of special missing link or something. It was all a bunch of hype in order for the funders of this paleontology project to get their investment back. Well, anyway, still, it's a hand. It's a hand. These hands, these grasping extremities, along with the lengthened limbs, suited these creatures for leaping and grabbing a hold of, imagine, tree trunks, like in that last picture, or leaping from branch to branch. Another adaptation that they exhibited for the first time was stereoscopic vision. That is, their eye sockets aimed forward instead of to the sides. Let's see here. Stereoscopic vision. Now, check this out. What it is just overlapping visual fields that allow primates to perceive and interpolate two separate visual fields at once. So, okay, that actually is a little bit repetitive. So look at the image here. This rabbit has its eyes oriented to the sides, okay? Each eye has a pretty broad field of vision. they only overlap a little bit in the front, and this would be where rabbits have depth perception. For rabbits, it's really more important to be able to see way back, behind them almost. It's more important to be able to watch for predators coming from this direction rather than to have good depth perception in this direction because, well, what's the use of the depth perception? If you've just got to run away real fast, you've just got to see your obstacles coming and go around them. It's not quite, well, I mean, I guess getting away from predators is pretty complicated. I was about to say it was not quite as complicated as jumping through the trees, but I don't know. I don't know what a rabbit's life is like. By contrast, look at the primates here. This here is a lemur, and then here's a human. The lemur has a very big field of overlapping vision here. It can't see quite as far backwards to the sides as the rabbit, but it has a big area here where it has good depth perception. It has to do a lot of leaping around in trees, and you want to be able to judge distance, and that's what depth perception allows you to do. Look on the human here. We have a huge field of depth perception, whereas we really can't see out to the sides very far at all, and we certainly can't see behind ourselves. Or just think of a horse. Horses can see almost all the way behind their heads because of the orientation of their eyes. That's good for horses because if a predator is trying to sneak up on them, it's good to know about that. It's also good for primates to know if predators are sneaking up on them. But the bigger challenge in their lives seems to have been something that requires depth perception. And traditionally, we've thought that this was jumping from limb to limb in trees, but squirrels don't have stereoscopic vision, and they seem to do pretty well jumping from limb to limb in trees with their limited depth perception. So, another idea is that maybe stereoscopic vision was an adaptation of Plesiadapids' ancestors. We know the Plesiadapids ate leaves, but maybe their ancestors were hunting insects. And if you're hunting insects, it makes a lot of sense to have a big field of overlap so you can get lots of depth perception and you can accurately judge the distance between you and that insect so that you can leap out and snatch it without missing it. This link here, I will probably post it on the class webpage, but if you just want to scribble it down and go to it, it's a link of a tarsier, which is a kind of primate, and this tarsier is going to be hunting insects, and you're going to see what we think, or what folks think, maybe Plesiadapids' own ancestors were doing. So just to review, the idea is that either Plesiadapids and the first primates had stereoscopic vision to facilitate leaping around in trees, or the leaf-eating Plesiadapids had inherited the stereoscopic vision from their insect-eating ancestors. So two theories there. Grasping hands and feet. This is another one of these primate traits that I went over with you. These are a really flexible way for an organism to interact with the environment. And let me just put these up here. And I mean flexible, both in terms of the range of behaviors that you can do with hands. Think of your own hand and think of all the different things you can do with your hands. But I also mean flexible in terms of what hands offer as grist for the evolutionary mill. That is, if you can remember how flexible, evolutionarily speaking, the mammalian skeleton was, and how it was able to adapt in numerous directions and support the lifestyles of walruses, whales, gibbons, what have you. I want you to think of hands and feet, especially these 4 digits and then this 5th opposable digit, as also really good evolutionary grist. Just check this out. All the different sorts of hand and foot forms that we find among primates are just a sampling of them, really. Each one adapted to the primate's lifestyle. We can see the orangutan's hands and feet here. Look how he uses them. This is good for clinging to branches, for hanging from trees. The howler monkey doesn't brachiate so much, rather he walks on top of trees. So he's got hands and feet that are suited for kind of readying himself on a surface, on a stem surface on top of that branch. We have the tree shrew, not a primate, still has claws, living sort of a ratty lifestyle. Slow loris, sort of a primate sloth in a way, has these powerful vice-like gripping extremities. You can't pry this guy out of a tree. Baboon walks on the ground on all fours. And then the tarsier leaps and snatches insects with these hands. So remember, hands and feet are flexible. Lots of different locomotor styles appear from them. They're good for foraging and capturing prey like tarsiers do. They're great for using tools like humans, and orangutans can do it a little bit. They're good for communicating. We communicate with our hands, not so much with our feet. And they're just what you need for grooming. Also note, primates have nails, right? We don't have claws. See that little thumbnail? He's got a long nail and a long nail. These are still just nails. They're not claws. He has nails. Just little nails on top of his toe. Chimps have nails. Humans have nails. The idea here is that if the sheath, the hard covering for the fingertip, is moved to the top and is not used for traction anymore, then that increases the space at the end of the finger for tactile sensitivity. So it's sort of, in a way you could say, it improves the sense of touch in primates. And man, hands, they're so useful. I often think about all the things that humans have done to their environment to make their environment suited for creatures with hands, such as faucets, doorknobs, locks, things like that. Well, primates who have hands often find that they can use the human-constructed environment in ways very similar to what humans do with them. So that's hands and stereoscopic vision, and these are physical adaptations that are characteristic of primates. But if we want to get to, well, sort of the meat of the primate experience, I suppose, we have to talk about sociality. Primates are social specialists. Even the ones that don't really hang out in giant groups still exhibit intense sociality when they meet one another. And they have notions of hierarchies and rank and power, which are all things we talk about in human societies. And I'll show you how these play out in non-human primate societies. I want you to remember, though, that human sociality emerges from our primate lineage. Your social life is in part, a product of a ancestry you share with guys like these, guys and gals like these. So, sociality. It's an adaptation for flexibility. I've already defined sociality as the ability to organize into groups. But this ability to organize into groups allows for great flexibility. So in this sense, it's an expansion on the mammalian theme of flexibility. See, there's this idea, and this is my idea for you. If the environment is that to which organisms are organized, then sociality allows primates to be flexible in how they get organized to the environment. So whether it's an urban environment where you're feeding off of humans or you're working with humans, or if you're just out on the high steppe plains and you need to deal with 200 other members of your group, sociality is, and this ability to organize and reorganize into groups is what has allowed primates to spread all over the world, to enter into a variety of environments, and to succeed as well as they have. The drawback to being social, well, the big drawback is having to deal with all your friends. Um, and I mean, that comes down to daily stresses, right? But it also is an issue of the Malthusian trap. That is, if you are hanging out in big groups with lots of your buddies, there is the possibility that not everybody will have access to the resources that you all need. Um, and especially in terms of food and mates, or this is how the problem gets thought out with primate sociality. There's a lot more to primate social life than getting food and finding mates, but these seem to be two really important parts of primate social worlds that have consequences for how primates organize themselves. So I'm not going to play these here, but I want you to know that the first way that primates have of maintaining organization despite uh, probable competition over resources is just communication. And primates communicate often through vocalizations. So these four films, which I will put on the website, are short, they're only about 2 minutes each, maybe, films that demonstrate different primates giving calls uh, of different kinds. This last one shows facial expressions of rhesus macaques, which, well, I want to point out that it's not all about vocalization, it's not all about talking out and crying out, but there's a lot that goes on with primate faces. It's not just us humans who use our faces to communicate in deep and complicated ways, but other non-human primates also do. So these videos will be on the website for you. Grooming is also sort of part of communication. Touching is always part of communication, whether you're allowed to touch another individual or whether you are compelled to touch another individual, communicates a lot about the relative social status of the people involved in the touching and being touched. And of course, that goes just as well for non-human primates like these monkeys here. These are Japanese macaques. Grooming plays into it because, in terms of keeping your social group organized and stable, despite competition over resources, despite all the tensions of just hanging out with all your friends all the time, um, grooming kind of soothes over tensions, makes it easier to get along with everybody if you're all cooperating and you all can kind of scratch each other's backs. Communication is also carried out through these sort of sexual characteristics. Now, secondary sexual characteristics are more than just marks of reproductive readiness, right? So all these characters here are ready to reproduce and have offspring. Uh, but these sexual characteristics are also social marks. They have implications for your social life if you are a primate. Um, for instance, this guy with all the face paint, or it's not actually face paint, uh, this guy would only attain these bright colors if he were able to maintain a role of social dominance in his troop. He's a mandrill, and we will talk about social forms that primates have, but mandrills generally have one male in a group who maintains dominance over a few females. Uh, some people would call this a harem, um, and only if he can uh, maintain that dominance over his females, his female kin, and maintain uh, dominance over any other males who are in the area who might be interested in meeting up with his female associates. Will he be able to maintain all this coloration that he has? This here is a proboscis monkey. He's just sexually mature. Note he also has makeup around his eyes. Eyes are a very important part of primate communication, and so it's good to have some pale eyeshadow there because it makes it more obvious when your eyes are closed. We'll talk about that more later. This male mandrill, his rump is brightly colored, means he's an adult. He's in his prime. He's ready to reproduce. This female baboon here, her bottom is swollen. That means that she is in estrus. She's ready to reproduce. This has implications for her role in the social group. And David Hasselhoff has a hairy chest. He's ready to reproduce. A lot of the communication gets carried out facially, like I've said. Faces are more than just sensory nodes. I want you to know that faces are adaptations for multimodal communication, right? We pick up information with all these organs we have on our face, our noses, our ears, our eyes, but we're also transmitting signals. These are also functional complexes that we use to attract and manipulate the attention of others. This arrow seems to be backwards for some reason, and so does this one, but it's really pointing at different points on his face. This is Aishwarya Rai. She's an actress in Bollywood. Well, I don't know what her most recent movie is, but anyway, she's a big deal. And she's using some pretty typically primate techniques to attract attention to important parts of her face. Attracting attention to her eyes. This guy's name is Babu. He's one of the monkeys that I hung out with. He has red around his eyes. I'll show you more pictures that may make this more obvious. But the red around his eyes attracts attention to them. So he's a dominant male, and the subordinate monkeys better pay attention to his eyes so they know what's going on. Aishwarya also decorates her eyes with her eyebrows. His eyebrows aren't showing very well here. Aishwarya Rai also has lipstick to adorn her mouth. Now, he's not wearing anything quite like lipstick, and there's a reason for that, because he's trying to keep what he has in his mouth to himself until the right moment. You don't need lipstick when you have those. Primates are creative social manipulators, right? Look at this, right? Think about this. Our faces are adaptations for multimodal communication, and they are adaptations for manipulating the attention of others. Think about children making cute faces trying to get what they want, or your puppy. Yes, your puppy knows how to manipulate you too. But then think about what else humans have done. We can put masks on. We can cover our faces. Clothing effectively extends our face all the way down our bodies. In fact, it could be argued that our faces do not just stop on the front parts of our heads, but in fact go all the way up and down on our bodies. Certainly that would be the case on many primates, where their faces, their rear end faces, are as important as their front end faces. But on humans, think about what may have been behind the evolution of large breasts and large penises. Actually, it might be worth pointing out here that humans have the largest of both of those, of all primate species. And why would we need super large breasts and super large penises? At least relative to other primates, I mean. But why would we need these? Well, display. That seems to be a pretty good answer. I don't know. It could be all sorts of things. In fact, there's been a lot of speculation on why penises and breasts are shaped the way they do, and it frankly gets into some rather kooky territory. I'm happy to just say that our faces start about here, and then end maybe about here if we're naked, and then end wherever the clothes are. Sorry, Aishwarya, to use you as my model here. See, look, it folds into... Anyway. So, let's talk about phenotypes some more. In primates, males and females, and really this applies to any sexual species, males and females have different phenotypes. And this is not just in order to make reproduction possible, but the different phenotypes that males and females have, the different bodies, are the results, or partly the results, of different selective pressures. Okay? Now, the phenotype can be the body, but it's also the behavior. So keep that in mind as I go through the sort of different pressures that are exerted upon primate males and primate females over their life. And just think about it, okay? Now, this is going to perhaps sound questionable to some of you, and I'm glad that you would be questioning what I'm saying about this. But I do want you to think about it. Males and females have different problems in their lives, and whether or not they end up surviving, reproducing, and flourishing depends on different factors. So to start with females, well, they need more food, they need more calories, especially during pregnancy when their bodies are building babies, and also during weaning, or during the whole process of lactation and feeding their children. And then there's, of course, a lot of just general inconveniences of being a mother, such as having baby monkeys climbing all over you, uh, having to protect your children. And males also participate in this, but the investment tends to be a little bit less. Or rather, we could say the female investment tends to be greater. And so, this will sound a little socio-biological, and it really is a little socio-biological. So do think about that. So maybe, as a rule of thumb, we could say females, especially female primates, tend to organize around food, right? They have a greater burden in terms of their need for food because of their role in reproduction, and also because of their role in rearing juveniles. So females tend to organize around food. Males, well, males, like this big guy in the middle here, they don't have to put any effort into building a baby monkey in their body. And then they don't have to give milk to juveniles. Sometimes they do invest in protecting their offspring. A lot of different kinds of primates do this, and many different kinds of mammals do this. But reproductively speaking, perhaps the greatest investment for males is competing with other males over access to females. And again, this is not going to be the way it is for all primates. It's not going to be the way it is for all mammals. It's not even the way it is for all people, of course. But our little socio-biological rule of thumb for this one is if males are competing with other males around access to females, then males try to organize around females. So think about that. See if you can come up with a critique of it, maybe. So these two sort of basic, dare I say, principles of primate social organization play out in a lot of different ways. As environments and food vary, primate societies vary. So I'm going to give you some images here that will represent a few patterns, if you like, of primate society. So the first pattern I'd like you to know about is small family groups. Now, this is an advantage if it's just you and your baby, because you can move around more easily. And this is a good way of making your living if you feed on hard to find foods. Aye-ayes, for instance, they have to hunt insects to eat. And it's really an intensive activity for them. And we'll talk more about aye-ayes when I talk about primate taxa. But it's not something that they can do in groups effectively. In order to reduce competition, perhaps in order to reduce competition, they tend to stay as loners or at the most in pairs, a mother and her child. Orangutans prefer to feed on fruit. Fruit is actually rather rare in the forest. Fruit is something that's energetically expensive for plants to produce. So you have to go hunting for fruit. And if you're hunting for rare foodstuffs, you don't want a bunch of other people around with you. So solitary lifestyle is the general rule for orangutans, except when there are fruit blooms. When there's a whole lot of fruit, then maybe many orangutans will gather at one place. Also, they join up for mating, hanging out, going on dates. And of course, mother and child form a social unit. This is a different creature. This is an injury. This is a kind of lemur. They are actually follivorous, but they maintain small family groups. It's usually a mated pair and then their offspring. It could be one or two. Um, and what they do is they maintain large territories over a large expansive area. And they reduce competition over their foods, even though they're leaf eaters, again with this small group composition, and also by issuing a lot of vocalizations to mark out a territory. You often will hear people talk about animals maintaining territories. It often actually does not go down quite like that. Animals are not necessarily maintaining borders and marking territories in the way that we think of territories as humans who live in states. But they do sort of make sure that there's a distance between their group and other groups, these injuries. Another common pattern is the single male, multi-female group with roving groups of unattached males. So basically, this is a bunch of primates hanging out together. And that's possible if you feed on widely available foods. So gorillas, for instance, they eat pretty much all this green stuff in the background. They're sitting in dinner. So they don't really need to compete over food. But there's still competition over females. Males are still competing over females. So this is where we start seeing these sociobiological tenets that I talked about playing out. The females, they pass on, they stay with their mother's group generally. That is to say, they are matrilineal. If you're a female, you stay with your mother's group. But because males are competing over females, the rank hierarchy, and we'll talk about rank and hierarchies in a moment, tends to be patriarchal, which means there will be a male who will be the dominant individual in a group. There will be one male in a multi-sex group because he will be driving out other males who might reproduce with the females that he's trying to maintain access to. So the females, they're organizing themselves around food in as far as they need to because the food's everywhere. And then males will get kicked out of their group once they reach sexual maturity, and they could join a roving group of unattached males, or they could join a new group as a low-ranking member. At any rate, there would only be one reproducing male in the group. Gelada baboons also do this. They will have one dominant male in a group and then a kind of cluster of females and their offspring. Again, matrilineal. If you're a female, you get to stay with your family. If you're a male, you get to go somewhere else. And patriarchal. That is, males tend to exert dominance over the other members of the group. This is not to say that the lady gorillas and the female geladas can't do something about the male in their group if they don't like him. They can drive him off. They can fight him. They do outnumber him. And what's more, they have more coherent social connections with the members of their groups than the male does because they are matrilineal. They were born into that group. The male was an arriviste. Another way that this can go down is in multi-male, multi-female troops with outlying single-sex troops. We call these bachelor troops. Or they might be bachelor troops. Let me tell you how this happens. So this works if you happen to be an opportunist or a generalist. So chimpanzees, ring-tailed lemurs, and long-tailed macaques are three examples of primate species that eat a lot of different things. Ring-tailed lemurs, they prefer to eat the leaves and fruit of tamarind trees, but if pressed, they eat a lot of different things. They eat insects, they eat soil even. Well, so will these macaques eat soil. Chimps prefer fruit, but they eat meat as well. They eat insects, all sorts of things. And macaques, well, they like fruit and seeds and all kinds of different things, grasses. But they'll eat your garbage. They'll eat your leftovers. I've just had a lot of experience with relatives of these monkeys, and they'll certainly take the sandwich right out of your hand. That's what you call an opportunist. So they really aren't that picky about what they eat, but they will still, have to fight over food resources, and they still maintain a hierarchy. And again, we'll talk about hierarchies shortly. They still maintain a hierarchy that determines who can get to the food first. So these kinds of groups can be quite flexible. They can be patrilineal, like chimps. Patrilineal, remember, is, well, or you can imagine, is the opposite of matrilineal. So a patrilineal species like chimpanzees, the males would stay with the group that they were born with, while the females would get kicked out or have to leave eventually. Matrilineal groups, like the ring-tailed lemurs and the long-tailed macaques, if you're a female, you stay with the group that you were born into. And if you're a male, when you hit sexual maturity, you have to hit the road and go find yourself another bunch of friends. Power in these groups can also go either way. In ring-tailed lemurs, for instance, power is matriarchal. There tends to be an alpha female who runs the show. And then below her will be her mate, and then there will be ranks on and on below that. With chimpanzees, power tends to be patriarchal. That is, there tends to be a chief chimp, or the dominant chimp. Not to say he's a chief in any way that humans would use that word, but there tends to be a dominant chimp male, who then sort of systematically oppresses or politics with the other chimps in the group to maintain power. Or there could be separate rank hierarchies for each sex, and that is the case with these long-tailed macaques and rhesus macaques. There is an alpha male and an alpha female, so to speak, a dominant male and a dominant female. And then below them, there are sort of a ruling class of the elite male and elite female members of each family in the troop. And then below that, there are different ranks for different members of different families, and the families themselves are ranked one to another. And then furthermore, there are separate hierarchies for males and females. The dominant male does not necessarily outrank the dominant female, nor does the dominant female necessarily outrank the dominant male. They sort of have two different political worlds that they have to deal with. So I'm going to give to you as an example of primate sociality my monkeys, rhesus macaques. These are two images from Delhi, I believe. These monkeys live in the middle of one of the biggest cities in the world. What I want you to know is, well, rhesus macaques. Scientific name, Macaca mulatta. What a racy Latin name. Rhesus society is multi-male, multi-female, and they have roving male troops. Right? I didn't mention the roving troops, the bachelor troops. I should explain that. Of course, there are the main multi-sex troops that hang out together, but if you've got to kick out males, or you've got to kick out females, these individuals will often form their own single-sex bachelor troops. That is, until they can hook up with a larger group. At any rate, rhesus macaques, they are matrilineal. That means if you are a female, you get to stay with the troop that you were born into. But if you're a male, you have to go someplace else once you reach sexual maturity. And they have separate sex hierarchies. That means that in any rhesus macaque group, males and females will have their own political worlds that do overlap, but are more or less considered separate from one another. This is an older female. She lived at the Hanuman Mandir in Delhi. And then here is a young male, not completely sexually mature. He also hung out at the Hanuman Mandir in Connaught Place in Delhi. So, female hierarchy. This is how this works for rhesus macaques. It's matrilineal, as I said. So females form the core of the family group, and they rarely leave their birth group. Daughters inherit their mother's rank. Now, how do you inherit your mother's rank? If your mother is the chief female, the dominant female, and when she passes away, her youngest daughter should become the chief female, or should be the chief female. Well, how does that work? Well, it works like this. The mothers will protect their infants unconditionally, and so all the other monkeys in a troop must respect that infant as if she were her mother. And so, because conflict with that infant also necessarily becomes conflict with the infant's mother, you've got to treat the daughter as if she were her mother. So for other monkeys, a mother and her daughter may be of similar rank, but the mother outranks her daughter. Mothers do not share food with their children, not rhesus macaque mothers at any rate. And if her infant tries to take food from her, the infant will get a little slap, or a big slap. And so the mothers dominate their own children, of course. So that's how this works. Daughters inherit mother's rank. This is actually what you could call culture. This is a social process, right? Rank is not genetically determined, but rather it's determined through inheritance. For females, at least, it's different for males. So for males, a young male will benefit from his mother's protection, but that only lasts until sexual maturity, when he becomes visibly male in his phenotype, and you can guess what I mean by that. Well, what that means is his fangs get bigger, and his scrotum gets bright red. Yeah, so the other guys can kind of tell that he's competition now. At that point, he gets evicted by the males who are in his troop. Those males are not necessarily related to him. They might have been newcomers that then took a position of power within the troop. But whatever the case, they're going to kick him out when he starts becoming competition for females. And so these young males, rhesus macaques at least, they form roving gangs. And these gangs, geez, I mean really. But it sort of is like that. These young bachelor troops full of male monkeys who have no larger social group to keep them in order, they do make a lot of trouble. And they do tend to start fights. And they start fights with established troops. Because, well, these roving males, they're going to be nomads until they join an established multi-sex troop. And in order to do that, they have to kick out the ranking male who's already with that troop. So they need to come in, and this group of bachelors needs to come in and drive out a male. It can also happen that there would be males in a troop who drive out the dominant male and then take over a position from him. There's other ways these things can go down. These are just kind of outlines of how this happens for rhesus macaques. So all this relies on a notion of hierarchies. And primates are very good at hierarchies. All mammals really, you could say, have a sense of hierarchy in their social relations with one another. Hierarchy being ranks. And what these ranks and hierarchies do is they maintain group cohesion in spite of competition. They bring about a sort of order to the group. And that order is, well, if you're a high-ranking primate, you get first dibs on the food. If you get into a fight, you've got backup. And actually, most of the time, if there's a conflict, there won't even be a fight, because if you're conflicting with your subordinates, they will usually just defer to you. And within this notion of ranks and hierarchies, there are different ways we can talk about how primates arrange themselves. We can talk about primate societies as being despotic. And despotic is when power is achieved and maintained violently. Rhesus macaques, who I've just told you about, tend to be despotic. That is, the high-ranking monkeys, they may inherit their rank from their mothers, but they tend to maintain it by violently oppressing other monkeys, by getting mean with them when they have to. The next word I'm introducing to you here is nepotistic. And this means that power is maintained by individuals and families, which is to say that rank is strictly enforced. Um, that means, rhesus macaques are also nepotistic. So their rank gets passed down along family lines, mother to daughter. And when males have ranks, they tend to favor their close friends over everybody else. That's nepotism. The alternative to nepotism is egalitarianism. So we can also say that primate societies can be egalitarian. And this is when power is dispersed through the larger social group and rank is only loosely enforced. So look at this picture. I've shown it to you before. This is from India. This is the city of Vrindavan. This is behind that wall there, through this door, is the garden where Krishna danced with Radha, if you know her and him. If not, well, uh, he's a Hindu god, very popular, one of the major figures. Anyway, when Krishna was a child, he hung out with a lot of monkeys. And so people come to this place where Krishna perhaps danced and hung out with. He was quite a playboy, Krishna. He was really a favorite among the ladies. So what went on in this garden stays in the garden. But anyway, so people come to this garden as sort of a pilgrimage site, and there are monkeys there, and they feed the monkeys because, well, even though this is not a monkey temple dedicated to the monkey god, the monkeys, they do have an association with Krishna, and so people like to give them a little bit of food as a way of saying, way to go, Krishna, or rather, really, as a way of making puja to Krishna. It's a religious act for Hindus. I want you to look at the picture and, okay, knowing that the highest ranking primates get first dibs on the food, which one of these monkeys in this picture do you think is probably the highest ranking one? That's right, it's this one that's tugging on the man's clothes. She's going right up to the guy with the food and saying, "Give it to me," and everybody else just has to wait. Although by this point, when I took the picture, he had already thrown a lot of food out to a lot of monkeys. Okay, now which one do you think is the lowest ranking? Okay, yeah, maybe it's one of these fellas up here, or maybe it's this guy. Actually, these guys already had food, so what they did is they took the food and they got out, so they don't make any trouble. Nobody tries to take their food. So we really don't know what rank they are. But look at this girl right here. Yep, she doesn't have any food. She's waiting outside the group for somebody to give her some food. This girl is probably lower ranking than everybody in this group. She's probably the nerd. Aw. So when we look at rank, there are at least two different ways of thinking about how this happens, right? How are these primates keeping track of who's the boss? Who outranks whom? Okay, well, so if you're Dario Mastripieri, this is what you think. You think hierarchies are established through violence and maintained through real threats. Dario Mastripieri is a cognitive scientist. He does research at, I know he was at Chicago. I believe he's at Harvard now. He's a big deal, and he's a popular writer. And he argues that hierarchies in primates are only actualized through real violence and threats that have real violence behind them. Rank is established through actual violence, and power belongs to the actual toughest. The alternative way of thinking about this, I could give you Franz de Waal as the totem for the other, uh, or not maybe the other, but another big way of thinking about this. Franz de Waal says that rather hierarchies rely on something called formal dominance, which is dominance maintained through signals. Um, this is a threat face. Well, actually, this diagram is not a flow chart, as I was about to give it to you. These are showing different uh, facial signals that rhesus macaques can give off. Uh, this is a direct threat, this is a mild threat, and this is fear. And actually, this image is showing how if you take a mild threat plus fear, you get a face that's kind of a direct threat, you don't need to worry about that. But what you do need to worry about is that signals like these are more important for maintaining dominance than actual violence. And so if you're Franz de Waal, you think that power will go to the most socially adept. And it's not necessarily about dominating each other, but rather it's about throwing these signals at the right time and throwing them in such ways as to manipulate the people around you. Primates don't just beat on each other. They make friends, they make alliances, they politic amongst one another, they trade favors amongst one another. I'll groom you right now, and then later on, maybe you'll get my back in a fight. So I'm going to read you a story from Dario Mastropieri's book. It's called Machiavellian Intelligence. That's a play on words. You've heard of Machiavelli, right? The great Italian political philosopher. Well, Dario Mastropieri, of Italian descent himself, has made the claim that rhesus macaques are Machiavellian in the way they organize themselves politically. So I'm going to read you an excerpt from his book, Machiavellian Intelligence, that's going to describe sort of a social scene and his interpretation of how it would go down, okay? On a sunny and breezy day, Mr. T was walking along his favorite path with his head down and a serious look on his face, giving others the impression that he might be making plans for the next 10 mating seasons, but in reality simply counting his steps one after the other. Blubber was carefully monitoring Mr. T's movements, but at some point a female with a swollen bottom caught his eye, and he couldn't help but watch her for half a minute, thus losing track of Mr. T. When Blubber remembered Mr. T again, the alpha male was headed his way at full speed and on a full collision course. Blubber had to think fast. He knew that if he didn't move at all, the default response would simply take its course. That's violence. Whereas attempting to flee would only make things worse. The only way for Blubber to avoid the inevitable was to use the secret password that had been passed down to him through many generations within his family, and that he had learned early in his life, when he was in monkey first grade. Now that the alpha male was getting closer and closer, it was exam day for Blubber, and if he didn't perform well, he would end up paying a high price for his distraction. So this default response is violence. I'm just cutting into the story here, right? Mr. T is a despot and a nepotist, remember? If he bumps in to Blubber here, and he thinks Blubber is in his way, Mr. T is going to hand out a beating to Blubber. What is Blubber going to do? Mr. T was unaware of Blubber standing right in the middle of his path until Blubber's feet entered the upper part of his visual field. As the alpha male slowly raised his head to see the rest of Blubber's body, waves of electricity were already traveling along the neurons of his brain to set in motion the chain of events that would unleash the default aggressive response. Blubber, however, had been preparing for this encounter all his life and constantly rehearsing the secret password in his mind. The exact instant Mr. T made eye contact with him, and therefore, with perfect timing, Blubber fired his submissive signal. He opened his mouth wide and flashed his clenched teeth right in Mr. T's face. Blubber's performance of the signal was outstanding and earned a standing ovation from his audience. Mr. T was momentarily disoriented by the glaring of Blubber's teeth. It was as if a bucket full of water had been dumped on his firing neurons a nanosecond before the blast. With an acrobatic feat, the alpha male swerved around the subordinate, managing to avoid any physical contact, and quickly resumed his stroll. Another beating had been avoided. Man! In other parts of that book, Dario Mastropieri talks about rhesus macaques as computers, as literally he talks about them as computers with programs. And so the gist of this story, even though he doesn't use the computer language and the programming language, was that Mr. T has a programmed reaction to Blubber, and that Blubber, well, in other parts of his book, he certainly makes it seem as though Blubber has a programmed fear-face reaction to Mr. T in order to avert Mr. T's reaction. It's all programmatic for Dario Mastropieri. Although this story, there is some ambiguity there. He does have blubber going over the password in his mind. I think that's probably narrative license in Mr. Pieri's case. Now, why did I just read you this whole story? Why does this matter? Well, the reason it matters is because we often look to non-human primate societies in order to find out something about how we came about, in order to learn something about our society. This image is from another one of Dario Mastropieri's books, and you can probably interpret it quite easily for yourself. This is certainly the sort of stuff that Mr. Pieri teaches, that rhesus macaques resemble what humans look like at core. Mr. Pieri claims that humans have quote-unquote cultural clothes that make us all behave differently, but that if you strip off the cultural clothes, inside you've basically got a despotic, nepotistic rhesus macaque. He makes this argument rather awkwardly, I think, by looking at the military and looking at jails, saying that these are occasions when humans' cultural clothes are stripped off of them, and they all revert to a despotic, nepotistic, strict hierarchy. What he's ignoring, he's not a cultural anthropologist, so what he's missing, he's a cognitive scientist. What he's missing is that military and jails are not what you get when you strip culture away from persons, but rather the military and jails are different cultures. And that when you join the military or you join a jail, you become dressed in military clothes. You become dressed in jail clothes. You don't lose all your cultural clothing and become an aggressive monkey. Rather, you put on a new set of clothes. But at any rate, there still may be something to his argument that the similarities between humans and rhesus macaques could be explained as conservative evolution. Really, it's hard to deny that humans do have despotic and nepotistic tendencies. And Mr. Pieri argues that these despotic and nepotistic tendencies are conserved from a common ancestor between rhesus macaques and humans because they work, that they've been conserved and selected for over many thousands of generations because despotism and nepotism create stable, effective societies. There's 22 million years of evolution between us and rhesus macaques. That's not to say that rhesus macaques have not evolved for 22 million years. What that is to say is that the common ancestor of humans and rhesus macaques lived about 22 million years ago. And it would be a real feat, I guess, for that conservatism to keep despotism and nepotism as part of the behavioral repertoire for that long. But there are stranger things. And conservative evolution, we can see this operating on much longer scales than that, so it's conceivable. But then we have Franz de Waal again. The rhesus macaques are not nice, but he thinks that rhesus macaques are actually quite flexible. That's one thing that Dario Mastropieri does not give to my monkeys. He thinks that no matter where you go in the world, rhesus macaques are generally going to be the same. That they will have similar ways of organizing their societies and similar repertoires of behavior. Well, that's exactly what somebody who studies laboratory monkeys and monkeys on one island, Cayo Santiago, a laboratory island. That's exactly what somebody who studies laboratory monkeys would think. But I tell you, the monkeys who work at Jaku Mundir and steal your glasses, even though that behavior is not unique to Jaku Mundir, my research site, it is certainly a distinct culture for these monkeys. So I right away will tell you poo on Dario Mastropieri's idea that rhesus macaques have no culture and that they are the same worldwide. I tend to favor Franz de Waal, although his line of argumentation, if you're a scientist, you could say his line of argumentation is a little bit more squishy, a little bit less empirical, because he says that dominance is not part of the primate program, but it's something that's inherited through practice. and something that's made real through practice. And he doesn't presuppose that there's a program inside of rhesus macaques that cause them to flash signals, submissive signals and aggressive signals. Rather, he thinks that this is something that monkeys learn to do in context. In fact, in the article I'm having you read to go with this week's lectures, he talks about research where rhesus macaques who are despotic and nepotistic were put into a situation where they were outnumbered by another kind of macaque, Macaca arctoides, short-tailed macaques, who are egalitarian. These rhesus macaques, when they were forced to hang out with these egalitarian monkeys, gradually became more egalitarian. They are flexible. They may be dominant, but that may be something inherited through practice. That is to say, dominance of the despotic and nepotistic variety may be something that these monkeys are inheriting culturally. And if that is the case, that means that our common ancestor does not necessarily look like a rhesus macaque behaviorally. And that means that humans themselves probably are not programmed to be despotic and nepotistic. So again, just to summarize de Waal's point, what if despotism, nepotism is cultural but not genetic? And then I want to add one more thing here. If George Gaylord Simpson were alive today, he might be asking, okay, so humans, they are kind of despotic and nepotistic. They do tend to maintain power violently amongst one another, and they do tend to favor their close friends and family over everybody else. But what if that wasn't the state of the ancestral primate? What if it's convergent evolution? What if rhesus macaques and humans both happened upon this despotic, nepotistic behavioral repertoire because they happen to survive in similar environments? And it makes a lot of sense. Rhesus macaques are the most widespread primate in the world besides humans. They live in very large groups that can sometimes have hundreds of individuals in them, like humans. Their social worlds are full of lots of monkeys. And it's possible that the fact that human social worlds are full of lots of humans is sort of a common environmental factor that has led to the two species evolution in this direction. That is to say that despotism and nepotism is not necessarily programmed, it is not necessarily our inheritance, it could be something that humans happened into quite recently. In fact, some archaeologists will say that it's something that humans happened into only since the advent of agriculture. Maybe we'll talk more about that in a couple of weeks. Look, it's Empedocles, so this must be the end of the lecture. Keep in mind, love, strife, life, it's more than just competition, it's more than just getting along. There's a lot of complexity, a lot of different things go along with evolution. This is a video I'm going to ask you to watch. I will put this online. And here's the article I'm asking you to read. It's by Frans de Waal. It's very short, and it's written for a general audience, so there's no excuse not to read it. Discussion questions will be about these two things. I'll see you later.